champagne cork popped before the ink was even dry. Vivian watched it happen from across the conference table. Marcus Ashford, the man she had been married to for 4 years, was already reaching for a glass. His attorney was still organizing documents. The settlement agreement sat in front of her with its little colored tabs, marking where she needed to sign. And there was Marcus celebrating like he had just closed a business deal rather than ended a marriage. She watched the bubbles rise in his glass. She watched him lift it slightly, not quite a toast, but close enough. She watched the satisfaction settle into his features, that particular expression of a man who believes he has gotten away with something. The pen was in her hand. The signature line was waiting. She signed. One smooth motion. The same unhurried cursive she had used to close deals worth more than his entire inherited fortune. The same steady hand that had built portfolios and restructured failing companies and made grown men in boardrooms reconsider their positions. No trembling, no hesitations, no tears. She slid the folder back across the table. She stood up. She picked up her purse. "Congratulations," she said, just that one word, delivered without sarcasm, without bitterness, without any of the emotion he was clearly expecting. She watched confusion flicker across his face. He had prepared himself for something else. Tears, perhaps, maybe an argument. Some kind of reaction that would let him feel like this situation was complicated, like he was a man navigating a difficult circumstance, rather than simply a man who had made selfish choices and faced no consequences for them. Vivian gave him nothing to hold on to. She walked out of that conference room without looking back. And if you think that was her lowest moment, you need to keep watching, because that signature was not a surrender. That signature was a starting gun. Subscribe now, because this story is about to take a turn that nobody saw coming. Not the attorneys in that room, not the family who had spent years underestimating her, and certainly not the man who was still standing there with champagne in his hand, wondering why his victory felt so strangely hollow. Here is what Marcus Ashford did not know on that Tuesday afternoon. 18 months later, he would stand in the entrance hall of his family's most treasured estate, a property called Pemberton House that had been in Ashford hands for 3 generations. He would stand beneath the portrait of his grandfather, surrounded by wood paneling his great-grandmother had selected, waiting to meet whoever had purchased his family's legacy. And he would watch his ex-wife walk through those doors, take the seat at the head of the table, and open a leather portfolio like she had been running things all along. How does a woman who walked away with nothing end up owning everything that mattered to them? That is the question this story answers. But this is not a revenge story. I need you to understand that from the beginning, revenge is about destruction. This is about resurrection. This is about a woman who remembered who she was. And to understand how she rose, you need to understand how they tried to make her small. Let me take you back to the night it all started. Vivian Okafor was not supposed to be at the Morrison Foundation Gala. She was a senior analyst at her firm, rising fast through the ranks, and galas were typically handled by client relations staff. But the associate assigned to represent the company had come down with food poisoning 2 hours before the event. Someone needed to go. Vivian drew the short straw. She arrived late, slightly underdressed compared to the old money glittering around the ballroom, and immediately stationed herself near the bar where she could observe without being observed. This was something she had learned early in her career. When you enter a room where you do not belong, find a corner, watch the patterns. Understand the dynamics before anyone understands you. The auction items being presented were absurd. A weekend on somebody's yacht, a painting that looked like a toddler's finger exercise, but apparently was worth $30,000. A private dining experience with a celebrity chef whose name Vivian did not recognize but everyone else seemed to worship. She ordered a club soda and settled in for a long night of professional smiling. "You are not bidding," said a voice beside her. She turned, tall, conventionally handsome in that prep school way, wearing the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having been told no. "I am here for the open bar," she said. He laughed, not the polished, practiced laugh of someone performing interest. Something genuine, something that crinkled the corners of his eyes in a way that made her think maybe this evening would not be entirely wasted. Marcus Ashford, he said, extending his hand. Vivian Okafor. What do you do, Vivian Okafor? She considered the question. She could have said senior analyst. She could have listed her credentials. Instead, she said something that made him lean in. I make money make sense. His eyebrow went up. That is either the most boring answer or the most interesting one. Depends on how much money you have. They talked for an hour, then two. Then the auction ended and the crowd thinned, and they were still standing there, their club sodas going warm on the bar beside them. Marcus told her about the family business, Ashford Heritage Properties, a portfolio of historic estates and landmark buildings that had been in his family for 3 generations. He spoke about it the way people speak about things they have inherited rather than built, with affection but without real understanding. What Vivian heard beneath his charming descriptions of old stone and older money was something he probably did not intend to reveal. She heard a man who had never once questioned whether the foundation beneath him was stable. A man who assumed permanence because permanence was all he had ever known. She found that interesting. She also found him interesting, and when he asked for her number at the end of the night, she gave it to him. The courtship was beautiful. The kind of beautiful that feels like a movie, private dinners at restaurants with unlisted phone numbers. Surprise weekend trips to coastal towns she had only read about. Flowers that arrived at her office without occasion just because he was thinking of her. Marcus pursued her with the full force of someone who had rarely encountered resistance and found it thrilling. Vivian had been pursued before. She knew the difference between performance and intention. And something about Marcus felt genuine. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He remembered details she had mentioned weeks earlier. He seemed genuinely curious about her world, her work, her way of seeing things. She let herself believe. That was the thing she would later have to reconcile. She was a woman who built her entire career on reading patterns, on seeing what was actually in front of her rather than what she wanted to see. And yet she let herself believe that this charming man with his easy smile and his ancestral estates could be the partner she had been waiting for. She would later recognize the warning signs she had ignored, the way he pursued what he wanted with full force but grew restless once he had it. The way he talked about his family's expectations like they were natural laws rather than arbitrary preferences. The way certain subjects made him uncomfortable and he changed them rather than engaging. But in those early months she saw only possibility. His family was another matter entirely. The Ashfords occupied a particular tier of society that Vivian had studied from a distance but never inhabited. Their wealth was not flashy, it was structural. Their name was not on billboards, it was on cornerstones, on hospital wings, on the kinds of plaques that most people walk past without reading. Their approval was not given. It was withheld as a matter of principle. The first formal dinner was at the family estate. Vivian wore a dress she had agonized over for 3 days. Not too expensive, which would look like she was trying. Not too modest, which would look like she did not belong. She chose something elegant and understated. She chose wrong. She seems very capable, his mother Helena said after the introductions. She said the word capable the way a doctor might say concerning. Where did you say your family was from? His sister Dominique asked. She already knew the answer. She was asking for the performance of it. Originally Lagos, Vivian said. But I grew up in Baltimore. How interesting. That was the family vocabulary Vivian would learn. Interesting meant foreign. Capable meant threat. Practical meant not one of us. They had an entire language of pleasant words that meant unpleasant things, and they deployed them with the precision of surgeons. Marcus squeezed her hand under the table during these dinners. They just need time, he would whisper afterward. They are protective. Vivian gave them time. She also kept her observations to herself. The way Helena's smile never quite reached her eyes. The way Dominique catalogued every detail of Vivian's appearance, like evidence for a future prosecution. The way Marcus seemed to shrink slightly in their presence, become a younger version of himself, a son rather than a man. She noted these things and filed them away. She was very good at filing things away. The wedding was tasteful, expensive, and attended by 400 people Vivian had never met. She stood at the altar in a dress that cost more than her first car, surrounded by flower arrangements that cost more than her first apartment, and she promised to love a man who, in that moment, she genuinely believed she understood. His vows were beautiful, clearly written with help but delivered with what seemed like real emotion. When he said forever, she believed him. When he said partner, she believed him. When he slipped the ring on her finger and looked at her with tears in his eyes, she believed she had found what she had been looking for. She was wrong. Marriage, revealed Marcus, the way time reveals wood beneath paint. The charming spontaneity that had drawn her in became unpredictability. Dinner plans cancelled at the last minute, weekends rearranged around obligations he had forgotten to mention. The romantic gestures grew less frequent, then rare, then essentially non-existent. The confidence became entitlement, conversations where her opinion was asked for, but not actually wanted. Decisions made without her input and presented as settled matters. The gradual assumption that her career, her time, her priorities were somehow less fixed than his. The pursuit that had felt so intoxicating when directed at her gradually redirected toward other things. Golf weekends that stretched longer each time. Business trips to cities that did not seem to have any Ashford business interests. Evenings that ended later and later with increasingly thin explanations. She told herself it was adjustment. The first year of marriage is hard for everyone. She told herself it was the family pressure, the expectations he carried, the weight of legacy. She told herself a lot of things because the alternative was admitting that she had made a mistake. But it was the business that truly showed her who she had married. Ashford Heritage Properties was, on paper, a crown jewel, 12 estates across 4 states, 3 landmark buildings in major cities, a portfolio that should have generated substantial passive income for generations. The name alone opened doors. The reality was different. Vivian began to see it almost accidentally. A document left on Marcus's desk, a phone conversation she overheard, a question she asked that he answered too quickly without realizing what he was revealing. The reality was deferred maintenance that had been deferred for decades. The reality was balloon payments coming due on loans that had been restructured poorly. The reality was a cost structure designed for an economy that no longer existed. Vivian saw this the way she saw everything in the numbers, in the patterns, in the silences between what people said and what was actually true. She tried to help, gently at first. "The Pemberton estate is bleeding money," she said one evening, spreading documents across their kitchen table. "The operational costs are 3 times what the rental income can support. But if we restructure the staffing model and renegotiate the maintenance contracts, we could." "I did not ask for a consultation," Marcus said. He did not look up from his phone. "I am not consulting. I am trying to help." He finally met her eyes. There was something in his expression she had not seen before, something that looked almost like resentment. "Vivian," he said, "my family has been managing these properties for 3 generations. I think we know what we are doing." She let it go. She let a lot of things go during those years. Her suggestions, her expertise. Her instinct that something fundamental was wrong beneath the polished surface of Ashford life. She let go of the version of herself that would have demanded to be heard. She became instead a quieter presence, a supportive wife, a woman who observed but did not interfere. It cost her more than she understood at the time. If you are feeling this story, if something in it resonates with you, I need you to drop a comment below. Tell me about a time when you knew something was wrong, but you convinced yourself to stay quiet. Tell me about the cost of that silence. And keep watching. Because what happens next is when everything changed. The discovery was not dramatic. There was no slammed door. No caught-in-the-act moment. No explosive confrontation in a restaurant or a parking lot, or any of the dramatic settings where these revelations happen in movies. There was only Vivian, working late on a Thursday night, reviewing a client portfolio on her laptop, while Marcus was supposedly at a business dinner. And there was his iPad left charging on the kitchen counter, lighting up with a notification. She was not looking for anything. She was not suspicious in that active, searching way. She simply glanced at the screen out of habit, the way you glance at any light that appears in your peripheral vision. The message was brief. intimate in its brevity, familiar in its tone. Cannot wait to see you tomorrow, same place. The name attached to the message was Isabelle Fontaine. Vivian knew that name. She had heard it at family gatherings, always spoken warmly. Dominique mentioned her often, a family friend, someone who had grown up in their world, someone whose family vacationed with the Ashfords, someone who fit, someone who was considered appropriate. Vivian set the iPad down carefully. She did not pick it up again. She did not search for more messages, more evidence, more confirmation of what she already knew with absolute certainty. She sat very still for 11 minutes, she counted, and she let herself feel the full architecture of what she was experiencing, not just the betrayal, a specific shape of it. This was not a random affair with a stranger. This was a choice that had meaning. Isabelle represented everything Vivian was not, the right background, the right family, the right understanding of their world. This was Marcus choosing the life he had been expected to live over the life he had promised her. After 11 minutes, something shifted in Vivian, not anger, something colder, something more useful. She opened her laptop, not to her client work, to something else entirely. She began pulling up everything she knew about Ashford Heritage Properties. Every document Marcus had shown her, every conversation she remembered, every detail she had filed away over 4 years of watching and listening and being underestimated. She did not confront him that night. She did not confront him the next day. She waited 8 days, not because she needed more evidence. She had enough within the first hour. She waited because she needed to be certain about something more important than what Marcus had done. She needed to be certain about who she wanted to be when she spoke. During those 8 days, she completed her analysis of the Ashford financial situation, and what she found was worse than she had suspected. The portfolio was carrying $14 million in long-term debt, badly structured, badly refinanced, coming due at the worst possible times. Revenue had been declining for 7 consecutive years. Not dramatically in any single year, but consistently. The kind of slow bleed that families like the Ashfords convinced themselves was temporary. The maintenance deferrals had created a cascade of problems. Repairs that would have cost $50,000 5 years ago now required $200,000. Systems that should have been replaced a decade ago were failing in ways that damaged other systems. And the personal guarantees, this was the detail that mattered most. Marcus had mentioned it once, casually, over a dinner 2 years earlier. He had not understood the weight of what he was saying. Bernard Ashford, the patriarch, had personally guaranteed several of the largest loans. This meant that when Bernard died, those guarantees would come due, and the family did not have the liquid assets to cover them. Vivian documented everything. She built a complete picture of the Ashford financial situation. She understood their position better than they did. And then, on a Wednesday evening, when Marcus walked through the door at 10:30 with a story about a client dinner that had run long, she was ready. "I know about Isabelle," she said. She was sitting at the kitchen table. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her voice was steady. Marcus froze in the doorway. She watched the sequence of expressions cross his face. Surprise first, then calculation, the quick assessment of how much she knew, how this could be managed, then a flicker of something that might have been shame before it was replaced by something harder, something that looked like resolve. "Vivian," he said, "let me explain." She held up one hand. "I am not asking for an explanation. I am telling you I know, and I am asking you what you want." He came further into the room. He sat down across from her. He rubbed his face with both hands, and then incredibly he tried to reframe the entire situation. "Maybe this is for the best," he said slowly, like the words were coming to him as he spoke, like he was discovering a truth rather than constructing an excuse. "We have been growing apart, you have to see that. And you have never really fit with my family, never really understood our world." "Your world," she said. "Yes," he seemed almost relieved to say it. "My world. We come from different places, Vivian. Different expectations. I think I always knew this was not going to work long term. I think maybe I was not ready for someone like you." She watched him talk. She watched him construct a narrative in which he was the protagonist, navigating a difficult situation, rather than a man who had betrayed his wife and wanted permission to feel good about it. He wanted her to argue. She understood that now. He wanted tears and accusations, and the kind of messy, emotional confrontation that would make him feel like this ending was complicated. Like they had both tried, but sometimes love is not enough. Like he was a good person in an impossible situation. She gave him none of it. "All right," she said. His mouth actually fell open slightly. He had prepared himself for many responses. This was not one of them. "All right, I will have my attorney contact yours." "Vivian, wait, we should talk about this. We should talk about this." She stood up. "We just did." She walked out of the kitchen. She walked up the stairs. She closed the bedroom door behind her and sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel the grief she had been holding back. Not for the marriage. The marriage had been dying for longer than she wanted to admit, but for the version of herself that had believed in it, for the hope she had carried, for the life she had imagined. She gave herself 15 minutes. Then she dried her eyes, opened her laptop, and called her attorney. The divorce moved quickly. Marcus seemed almost eager to finalize things. He had a new life waiting for him, a life that looked more like the one his family had always expected. Vivian understood that she had been an experiment, a deviation from the expected path, and now he was correcting course. She let him think he was winning. She asked for nothing beyond what was legally, unambiguously hers, her own accounts, her own investments, the professional reputation she had built before and during the marriage. She made no claims on the Ashford properties, no claims on the family businesses, no claims on anything that had his name attached to it. Harrison, the Ashford family attorney, seemed almost suspicious of her restraint. "You understand you are entitled to substantially more," he said during one of their meetings. His tone suggested he was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the real demands to emerge. "I understand what I want." What she wanted was out clean. Complete, free to become what she had been quietly preparing to become. Helena Ashford called her the day after the papers were signed. "This is probably best for everyone," she said. Her voice carried the same pleasant coldness it always had, but underneath it, Vivian could hear something else: relief, satisfaction, the pleasure of a problem finally resolved. "I agree," Vivian said. And she meant it. What the Ashfords did not understand, what they could not have understood, because they had never once taken her seriously, was that Vivian had spent 4 years building an intimate understanding of their entire financial structure. Not intentionally at first, she was simply doing what she had always done, reading patterns, understanding system. Seeing the architecture beneath the surface, the information was everywhere. In documents Marcus left on his desk, in conversations she overheard at family dinners, in public records she cross-referenced out of professional habit. By the time she walked out of that marriage, she knew the Ashford financial picture better than they did, and she knew exactly what would happen when Bernard Ashford died. She did not wish for his death. That is important to understand. Bernard had actually been the kindest of them to her. A quiet man who seemed more interested in his gardens than in family politics. She respected him in a distant way. But she understood mortality, and she understood debt structures. And she understood that Bernard was 78 years old with a heart condition that the family pretended was less serious than it was. She began building. The year after the divorce was the most focused period of Vivian's life. She left her firm, not in anger but in purpose. She had learned everything she could learn there. It was time to build something of her own. She called it Meridian Capital Group. The name suggested stability, navigation, the ability to find direction in uncertain circumstances. That was exactly what she offered. She assembled a small team of people who saw value where others saw problems, analysts who understood distressed assets, attorneys who knew how to structure complex acquisitions, advisors who had relationships with institutional investors looking for alternative opportunities. The firm's focus was strategic acquisition of undervalued properties, historic buildings that needed vision, estates that had been mismanaged, assets that looked like liabilities to people who did not know how to read them. She was very good at reading them. Within 12 months, Meridian had closed 4 acquisitions, small deals, but profitable, enough to build a track record, enough to attract serious capital, enough to be taken seriously when larger opportunities emerged. And then Bernard Ashford died. He passed quietly on a Sunday morning in March, 16 months after the divorce was finalized. Vivian read about it in the business section 3 days later. A small article about a family patriarch, a mention of the estate, the standard language about a life well lived. She sent no flowers. She made no contact, but she began watching carefully. What she had predicted began to unfold almost immediately. The debt that Bernard had personally guaranteed came due. The family discovered that the reserves they had counted on were substantially smaller than they had believed. Emergency meetings were held. Accountants were summoned. Attorneys were consulted. The Ashford family was forced to confront something they had spent generations avoiding. The empire was not as solid as the name suggested. Within 4 months, the decision was made to sell. This is the part of the story you have been waiting for. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now. If you know someone who needs to hear this story, send it to them right now, because when those doors open, everything changes. The Ashford portfolio went to market quietly. The family had enough pride left to avoid a public listing. They wanted private negotiations. Discreet inquiries, no headlines, no indication to the world that the great Ashford name was in distress. They engaged Harrison to find appropriate buyers, families like themselves, institutional investors who would appreciate the historical significance, someone who would maintain the legacy. What they got was an offer from Meridian Capital Group. Harrison did not recognize the name. When he researched it, he found a firm with an excellent track record, young but serious, well-capitalized, professionally managed. The principals knew what they were doing. He negotiated with their representatives for several weeks. He found them efficient, knowledgeable, and remarkably well-informed about the properties. They seemed to understand the portfolio better than most buyers would. They asked the right questions. They knew where the value was hiding. The terms they offered were clean. The price was fair, not generous, but fair, which was precisely what a family in the Ashfords' position had to accept. Harrison recommended the offer. The family accepted. What Harrison did not know, what none of them knew, was who they were really dealing with. Vivian had structured Meridian carefully. Her name was not on the public documents. She operated through legal entities designed to provide appropriate privacy. There was nothing illegal about it, nothing even unusual in the world of high-end real estate acquisition. It was simply good practice. But it meant that when she bought the Ashford portfolio, including Pemberton House, including the property that had been in their family for 3 generations, including everything that represented their legacy and their identity and their place in the world, they had no idea who had purchased it, not until she was ready to tell them. The closing happened on a Tuesday. Vivian signed the final documents in a conference room overlooking the city. She thought about Marcus in another conference room, 18 months earlier, popping champagne before the ink was dry. She did not pop champagne. She simply signed her name, collected her copies, and went back to work. There was a lot of work to do. 2 weeks after the closing, the Ashford family received a formal invitation. They were asked to attend a meeting at Pemberton House. The purpose was to introduce the new ownership and discuss transition arrangements. The tone was professional and appropriate, the kind of invitation you would expect from serious people who had made a serious acquisition. Marcus arrived first. He stood in the entrance hall of Pemberton House, a room he had known since childhood. The dark wood paneling his great-grandmother had selected, the portrait of his grandfather above the main staircase, the particular way the afternoon light came through the tall windows. He was preparing himself to meet the new owners. Investors, he assumed, numbers people. They would want to understand the property's history. They would want guidance on maintaining the legacy. He could help them with that. He would be gracious, dignified. He would show them that the Ashford family, even in reduced circumstances, knew how to conduct themselves. He straightened his jacket. He checked his watch. He heard the front door open behind him and turned with a practiced smile to welcome whoever was about to walk through it. The smile died on his face. Vivian entered Pemberton House wearing a charcoal suit and carrying a leather portfolio. Her hair was pulled back. Her expression was composed. She looked exactly as she had always looked. Calm, unhurried, completely herself. She scanned the room once. Her eyes moved over Marcus, over Helena and Dominique, who had just entered behind her, over Harrison, who stood near the fireplace. She acknowledged each of them with a brief nod. Nothing more. Then she walked to the head of the long table that dominated the room's center, the seat that Bernard Ashford had occupied for 40 years, the seat that Marcus had assumed he would inherit. She sat down, she opened her portfolio, and she waited. For a long moment no one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the old clock on the mantel, ticking away seconds that seemed to stretch into hours. Harrison cleared his throat. He looked at the documents in his hands. He looked at Vivian. Something was clicking into place in his mind, something he clearly wished was not clicking into place. The Ashford Heritage Properties portfolio, he said slowly, has been acquired by Meridian Capital Group. He paused. His eyes moved to Vivian again. The managing principal of Meridian is Miss Vivian Okafor. Dominique made a sound that was not quite a word. A sharp intake of breath, a half-formed protest, something that died in her throat before it could become language. Helena went absolutely still, the kind of stillness that comes when the mind is processing something it cannot quite accept. Her face, usually so carefully composed, showed nothing, but her hands clasped in front of her were white at the knuckles. And Marcus stared at Vivian across the length of that table, his ex-wife, the woman he had dismissed, the woman he had betrayed, the woman he had congratulated himself on escaping. For the first time since she had known him, he had absolutely nothing to say. Vivian let the silence hold for another moment. Then she opened her portfolio and looked at the documents inside. "We have a lot to cover today," she said. Her voice was calm, professional, the voice of someone who had come to do business. "Shall we begin?" The meeting broke for 15 minutes after the initial terms were presented. Marcus found her in the hallway, the same hallway where she had stood quietly during family gatherings, nursing a glass of wine, while the Ashfords toasted names and achievements that would never include hers. Vivian, his voice cracked on her name. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The confidence that had once seemed so attractive now looked like something that had been borrowed rather than earned. "I do not even know how to begin," he said. "Then don't," she replied. Her tone was not harsh, simply clear. He ignored her advice. "I had no idea you were." He stopped, started again. "Was this your plan? When we were married, were you always?" She considered the question carefully, because it deserved a careful answer. "No," she said. "When we were married, I was trying to build a life with you. I was trying to love you in a way you could understand. I was trying to become part of your family and your world. What I did after was simply me returning to who I have always been." "And who is that?" She met his eyes. "Someone who sees things clearly, someone who acts on what she sees." He nodded slowly, absorbing something that would take much longer to fully understand. "I am sorry," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper, "for how I treated you, for how my family treated you, for everything." "Marcus," she said, his name gently, not to cut him off, but to redirect the conversation. "I am not here for apologies. I am here because these properties have extraordinary value that has been neglected for years. I intend to restore them. That is the whole story." "No," he said quietly, "it is not the whole story. Not for me." She looked at him for a long moment. This man she had loved, this man she had believed in, this man who had made her feel small and then wondered why she had grown. "I know," she said, and she walked back into the meeting. The terms Vivian laid out were fair, deliberately so. The family could remain in the residential wing of Pemberton House under a structured lease arrangement. They would have 2 years to transition, to find other accommodations, to adjust to their new circumstances. The rent would be nominal. The arrangement would be dignified. The operational staff, the people who had actually maintained these properties for years, would be retained. Their positions were secure. Their salaries would be improved. These were people who had shown up every day and done their jobs regardless of who owned the buildings. They deserved stability, so anyone who wanted to remain involved in property management could apply for positions within the new structure. This included Marcus. He could submit his resume like anyone else. He would be evaluated on his qualifications. The surprise in the room was palpable. They had expected revenge. They had prepared themselves for humiliation, for demands designed to wound, for the kind of cruelty that people in their position often received from people who had replaced them. What they received instead was professionalism. "You could have destroyed us," Helena said near the end of the meeting. Her voice was controlled, but something underneath it was not. This was a woman who had spent her entire life in command of every situation. And now she was sitting in her own home, facing the woman she had dismissed for years, completely uncertain of what came next. "Yes," Vivian said simply. "I could have." She let the silence hold for a moment. But that was never the point. Helena stared at her. For the first time, she seemed to actually see the woman her son had married and discarded, not as a threat, not as an outsider, but as someone who had always been exactly who she appeared to be, someone capable, someone practical, someone who made money make sense. "I want you to understand something about this story. It would be easy to frame what Vivian did as revenge. It would be satisfying in a simple way. A woman scorned, a family humiliated, justice served cold. But that is not what this is. Revenge is about destruction. It is about making others feel the pain you felt. It is about settling scores and balancing ledgers of suffering. What Vivian did was something different. What Vivian did was reclamation. She did not need to destroy the Ashfords to win. She did not need to humiliate them. She did not need to take anything from them beyond what she had legitimately purchased. What she needed was to remember who she was. Before she walked into that charity auction and met a charming man with an easy smile. Before she let his family's opinions make her question her own worth. Before she compressed herself to fit a space that was never designed to hold her. The purchase of those properties was not about them. It was about her. It was about proving to herself that she could operate at any level, that her skills were not limited by anyone else's perception, that the woman they had dismissed as incapable of understanding their world was, in fact, far more capable than anyone in that world had realized. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to tear down what hurt you. It is to build something so magnificent that the pain becomes irrelevant. The restoration took 18 months. Vivian oversaw it with the same attention she brought to every project, methodical detail, oriented, clear about what she wanted and unwilling to settle for less. Pemberton House underwent a transformation that honored its history while creating new possibilities. The East Wing was converted into a world-class event space. The architecture was preserved. The details that made the building special were maintained and enhanced. But the spaces were reimagined for modern use, for gatherings that would bring new life into old rooms. The agricultural land that surrounded the property had been generating almost nothing for years. Vivian leased it to 3 sustainable farming operations. Young companies with vision and energy and a willingness to invest in the soil. Within 2 seasons, the land was productive in ways it had not been in decades. The historical elements of the main house were preserved with care. Heritage specialists were consulted. Original features that had been covered or damaged were restored. The property began to look like what it had always had the potential to be. The staff flourished under the new management. People who had spent years maintaining buildings while being ignored by ownership suddenly found themselves valued, asked for input, given resources to do their jobs properly. The transformation in their work was visible almost immediately. And Marcus submitted his resume. He was not hired. Not out of spite. His qualifications simply did not match the needs of the operation. He had spent his life assuming that management was something that came with a name rather than a skill set. The new operation required actual expertise. He found other work eventually, something smaller, something more suited to his actual abilities rather than his inherited expectations. It was, according to people who knew him, probably good for him. The reopening was not a grand event. There was no champagne, no press release designed to make a statement. No crowd of important people gathered to witness Vivian's triumph. She simply showed up one evening when the main work was completed. She walked the grounds alone as the sun set over the restored gardens. She let herself feel the full shape of what she had built. She thought about the charity auction where everything had started, the open bar where she had stood observing, the stranger who had walked up and asked why she was not bidding. She thought about the wedding, the promises made, the hope she had carried into that marriage. She thought about the years of being underestimated, the years of suggestions ignored, the years of watching her husband's family celebrate mediocrity while dismissing excellence. And she thought about the moment she had seen that message on his iPad, the moment when everything she had tried to believe in had shattered into something she could not rebuild. She did not regret loving him. That surprised her even now, but it was true. The love had been real, even if it had been misplaced. The hope had been genuine, even if it had been misguided. She had given herself fully to something, and that was nothing to be ashamed of. She did not regret the marriage. It had taught her things about herself she might never have learned otherwise. It had taught her how much she could endure. It had taught her how dangerous it was to endure when breaking might have been healthier. It had taught her the difference between flexibility and compression. What she felt standing on the restored terrace as the last light faded from the sky was not triumph. It was something quieter. It was the feeling of a conversation finally finished, a story that had reached its natural end, a chapter that could now be closed because it had been fully lived. She felt the weight of her own life settling into something solid beneath her feet. All of it, the hard parts and the rebuilt parts, the pain and the recovery, the loss and the reclamation. She had never wanted their name. She had never needed their approval. She had needed to remember who she was before she walked into that ballroom and let someone else's expectations make her feel small. She remembered now. The sun dropped below the tree line. The restored stone of Pemberton House glowed amber for a moment, then settled into the soft grey of twilight. Vivian stood there until the first stars appeared. Then she turned and walked back inside, not to prove anything, not to make a statement, not to demonstrate her victory to anyone, just to live. And that is where this story ends, not with noise, not with the dramatic confrontation that you might have expected, not with tears or apologies or the kind of explosive resolution that makes for easy drama. It ends with quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes when you have stopped performing your strength and started simply being it. If this story stayed with you, I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel. More stories like this are coming. Drop a comment and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the champagne, the discovery, the moment she walked through those doors? I want to know. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who has been underestimated, someone who is still in the compression phase, someone who needs to remember who they were before someone else made them feel small. This story was for everyone who kept working when nobody believed in them, for everyone who stayed quiet and watched and learned, for everyone who walked away from a situation that was not serving them, for everyone who built something magnificent from the ruins of someone else's expectations. This one was for you.